Welcome to the Future of Wellness, exploring self-transformation and holistic healing to unlock your inner potential. Hosted by Christabel Armsden and Keith Parker.
Most manifestation advice is about the mind, but manifestation doesn't just happen in the mind. It happens through your whole system, through your body and your energy field.
Mindset alone won't create lasting change. This is a topic we're going to cover in a workshop next weekend, exploring manifestation and the chakras, most specifically the chakras as a creative blueprint.
Because this is January, and so often we get into resolutions and resetting intentions, what have you. So if it resonates with anybody listening, join us for the Chakras and Manifestation workshop. A core idea that we're going to explore is that manifestation derives from your most active internal states, whether you're conscious or unconscious about it. And so we need to become conscious if we want to create what it is we actually desire.
We're going to be working directly with the idea of the energetic patterns that influence your clarity, your creativity, your motivation, and this sense of grounded action. So whether this is your first time exploring chakras and energy work, or whether you're already familiar with the chakras, we think this conversation is going to offer a powerful opportunity to really connect with your creative potential from the inside out. Let's define what we mean with regards to the chakra system and this act of creativity, right? Bringing our creation into form. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about where this process can break down, how it can break down, and how to open the system up so we can really work with this process consciously and effectively.
So we want to clarify how manifestation is related to the chakra system and the energy field. That's what we do at Field Dynamics, is learn how to clarify ourselves, clarify our energy fields in order to be able to create and be the best version of ourselves in the world, that which we envision ourselves to be, to fulfill our greatest potential is another way of saying that. And so when we look at the chakras and we understand the function of the chakras as a kind of system, then we may get insights into how it is our manifestation or creativity is being blocked.
One of the most useful frameworks we can look at when we're considering this idea of manifestation is to really name and understand one of the foremost common misunderstandings. And this is very much embedded in contemporary culture. This is the idea of manifestation as a purely mental effort. And we're all familiar with this, right? This idea of visioning harder, holding our goals in our mindset, thinking positively, right? We can read this potentially as forcing outcomes. We also have this very sort of trendy, contemporary online version of manifestation that happens through social media, right? This idea of mood boards and aesthetic reinvention, right? Manifesting my dream life. We all see those reels on Instagram. So what we're really talking about here is what happens when the mood board doesn't work. What happens when we know and can identify our goals and intentions for ourselves, but surprise, surprise, this just doesn't manifest into form for us, no matter how long we give that or how much energy we put towards it. And here we have manifestation becoming an identity aesthetic, if you will, instead of really recognizing and engaging with the energetic process, the embodiment of manifestation. We're going to be considering this pressure to curate your future versus actually learning how to listen to your intuition and attune yourself, attune your system, your body, your physicality, somatically, emotionally, to what's really going to support you, what's really truly aligned to your true north, as it were.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there in differentiating between something that you are envisioning consciously, something that you want, like a mood board, like you're saying. And very often when we think of manifestation, we think of it as being directed or willful or chosen. But the kind of secret behind manifestation in many ways is that actually what's happening is that you are creating things, whether you're conscious of them or not, i.e., the things that you're unconscious of that have strong pressures or drives within your system are also a creative force within you. And that's why the healing process and in a sense, the awakening process is so important because if we're not aware of the so-called stuck energies within ourselves, then we're actually going to be manifesting or creating realities and experiences and interpretations that are in line with those unresolved things within us.
So, in aligning our energy system, in bringing in more coherency, in releasing more and more dissonance, right? Awakening this creative blueprint within the system, we're really learning to release our emotional blocks. We're learning to let go of outdated patterns of behavior and what we might think of as energetic stagnation. All of these things inhibit manifestation. So, it's quite interesting to think that creation is happening through the human system, as it were, through the energetic system, not outside of it. And if we're manifesting from our most active internal state, as you say, consciously or unconsciously, we might want to get really clear about what that active internal state looks and feels like, because the field is going to mirror the quality of your system, not your wish list.
Let's get into the structure of this a little bit because specializing in the energy field gives you many insights into how this actually works. We're all aware, for example, of the simplistic causal relationship between thinking of something and then that being the starting point for it actually happening. So if I, for example, want to bake a cake, I think of baking the cake first mentally, and then I create it physically. That enables that physical creation. And so the idea in manifestation from a kind of an energy anatomy standpoint is that we take that idea all the way to the nth degree and say, what is it like if we really consider that all things that we see physically created in a certain sense are starting from more energetic domains? So sometimes we call this a field first model in field dynamics to kind of understand this causal relationship between the imagination or the creative space of mind and then how that relates to physical reality. But we see this mirrored in the structure of the chakras as well.
Right. So we could say that the chakras are describing how consciousness is moving into lived form. Chakras are interfaces, right? They're how the invisible becomes lived experience. And that's not from a symbolic sense, but the functions of them, how energy, emotion, and action organize within your field, within your system. So hopefully in this conversation, we're really going to start to sort of peel back the layers and learn to understand why effort alone isn't going to create change, at least lasting change, and what actually does.
I think it's helpful to think that there are different aspects to what we are. We have, in a certain sense, a physical body. We clearly have a kind of a mental domain. And if we wanted to call it a mental body, we could. But when we think of just like pure mind, when we're in a purely kind of creative space or imaginative space, we might think of that as pure mind. And then there's this other domain that us humans tend to be quite familiar with, and that's emotions. And sometimes there are traditions that talk about an energy body that is the emotional body. There are lots of ways to think about that, but let's at least consider that when we talk about creativity and being creative and manifesting, that these domains have an interplay. They have going from mental potential spaces through emotional domains within ourselves and then into the physical plane.
We could say that creation is following a sequence, right? First is an impulse, a desire, an intuition, right? A sense of wanting something to happen. And then that impulse is moving through the human system, the body, the emotions, the nervous system, the energy field. And then finally, it's expressing. And that might be as an action, as a relationship, as a circumstance in this world. So if we think of creation as this sequence, this impulse, translation, expression, then we can start to get to grips with how to work with it most successfully. And of course, from the angle of field dynamics, we're doing that through the energetic domain. And the chakra system, and we work with the 7 chakra system, the classical system, is really providing us with an excellent model of learning how to get to grips with our patterns, our behaviors, our emotions, and content, so that we can really learn to work with this more successfully. And we can understand that when something doesn't manifest, it's actually rarely because the impulse wasn't clear, though it can be. It's often because something in the translation couldn't carry this all the way through the creation sequence. So let's anchor this through the chakra system more. Right, let's think about how each center acts as a kind of dimensional gateway, if you will, influencing our creativity, our clarity, our intuition. So we might think that when the chakras are open and coordinated, that manifestation is a natural expression, successful manifestation, smooth, timely manifestation is a natural expression of that inner coherence. However, when things are blocked or misaligned, even our clearest intentions can feel, we might say, out of reach, right? So each center of the chakra system, the classical chakra system, if we're approaching it in this way, as interfaces, becomes a phase of translation in that act of creation. So we might think of each chakra as organizing a specific layer of creation: safety, desire, agency, connection, expression. So I like to think of this as the circuitry through which life is moving into form. And when one part of that circuitry is overloaded, underdeveloped, or perhaps in protective mode, right, then the current isn't able to interflow. It distorts.
Exactly. And it's helpful to think of how things work from the top down. So many people listening to this are going to be familiar with the idea of seven chakras. Your crown is at the top, your root is at the bottom, the heart's in the middle. And the crown chakra is the most complex chakra. It's called the thousand-petaled lotus in the yogic tradition. And that's the connection. It's always translated in all the traditions in the world, even the ones that don't call it chakras, as the connection to allness, the connection to kind of the whole, right? So if you think of that as all possibilities, you start from all possibilities and then it drops down like different layers, different levels, different dimensions, as you said. And each of the levels kinds of creates a filter for how going from anything, something specific is created. So the higher levels are more expansive. They have greater possibilities, ranges of possibilities. And as you go from the higher levels and you drop down through the lower levels, you go from pure mind or pure thought and imagination through the level of the heart and more we might think of as emotional layers or desire or passion. And then it works its way to the lowest levels, which are the lower three chakras. And that's more about the physical domain and making its way and grounding its way through the body.
And we're talking there about embodiment, really, and being able to hold capacity, right? The body is not secondary in our creation. It's actually how creation learns to exist in this three-dimensional reality. So if the system can't hold the impulse, right, emotionally, physically, relationally, the body isn't able to sort of physically express it. That's why effort alone doesn't work, because the effort can't override incoherence, right? So we don't manifest by pushing harder, but by becoming more coherent, so we're able to carry through what's trying to move. And you mentioned the different chakras there and how they might interfere with that process, that circuitry. Classic examples: the heart, worth, a sense of worth, relational truth, right? The solar plexus: can I choose this myself? Can I trust myself? Sacral: is it okay to feel the desire of this and to receive it, right? Our emotional flow, our connection to creativity and pleasure. And that classic one there at the root: is it safe enough? Am I safe enough to build this, to ground this into being, to trust in the survival and the stability of this act of creation? So many different themes when we look through the chakra contour or the system. And when one of these levels are unable to translate this, the manifestation is stalled.
So the chakras become these filters for taking the process from kind of more energetic, etheric domains down through the physical. And if there's blockage in the chakras, blockage in the system, it disrupts this flow of going from one domain to the other in a smooth and harmonious manner. So I can think of, for example, let's say I'm working on music or something like that, and I sit down to write a song. And as I'm sitting there within 5 minutes, I start to feel this pressure in my body, and there's all of this anxiety. And what it does is disrupts my ability to continue on with the creative process. Now, what's happening there? Well, there's some kind of emotion, there's some kind of physical sensation that in the act of being creative, my system has some kind of a blockage that is then throwing me outside of the ability to basically be present, to be in the flow, and to take an idea and bring it through all levels of the system. I certainly know that from personal experience in the past when I was in music, when I had really tough times sometimes trying to sit down and write a song to create music.
I think it's really important when we mention the word blockage. It can often, what blockage actually is. When people hear the word blockage, they can often assume the sense of a failure, particularly in relation to goals and manifestation, right? So it's really important to reframe blockage not as failure, right? It's not something you're doing wrong. And it's not a case of not trying hard enough. So we need to make sure that we're not sort of in judgment and in a sort of situation of shame around that lack of clarity. But actually, it's really helpful to consider blockage often as protection, right? So it's a form of protective adaptation very often. At some point, your system learned a strategy, right? To stay safe, to be accepted, to survive. And that strategy may have been very intelligent at the time, right? It may have even been necessary, but it was formed in a different context, right? Often earlier in life. It doesn't always translate cleanly into what you're trying to create now. And yet unconsciously, it's very much getting in the way.
Yeah, it's important to make clear that blockage shouldn't or doesn't necessarily have to be looked at as a bad thing. I mean, of course, from a healing perspective, we are very big on talking about how flipping the script and the frame and seeing that all blockage, all hurdles, all challenges, if they can be taken as opportunities to learn, that we can find appreciation and gratitude for these things. One great connection we can make here is that we're talking a lot in terms of energetic language, but it's important to say when we talk about blockage, which is a very general kind of topic, it does cover what might be spoken of in physiology and in psychology. Like, for example, in physiology, we now have a lot of language around the nervous system and dysregulation in the nervous system, fight or flight, freeze or flood, these kinds of things. These are all indicative of the kinds of blockage that we're talking about, where there's physiological correlates to this kind of struggle or problem in manifesting things, right? It's clear to say that if my nervous system is highly dysregulated, right, from some kind of overstressed circumstance, then it's going to be very hard for me to be in the flow and to be able to kind of create at a high level. And the same is true in psychology, right? If somebody said that, oh, you have a whole lot of repression or suppression or psychological imbalance, right? From a more traditional Western psychological standpoint, of course, these things would be indicative of potentially someone who is not going to have as easy a time creating, manifesting, taking their highest level ideas and putting them into the world to experience and share.
Yeah. So let's consider what that distortion, blockage, dissonance, lack of coherence, there's many ways of describing this, might look like, how it might show up in a sense of the act of manifestation, right? So people having strong ideas and no follow through. You mentioned action without satisfaction. This idea of really desiring something, getting it, maybe you manifest it quite successfully, and there's no real sense of that being worth anything to you. There's not an alignment to that arriving. Doing a lot and feeling nothing. Vision without traction. So really holding a framework of something you wish to create, and not even recognizing that it might not even be your own goal. It might be, a parental goal that's been sort of instilled in you. It might be a societal goal or aim, and not really having true connection to it. Vision without traction. Over efforting and then collapsing. We all know this one. Really pushing hard for something and then just literally burning out, and then pushing for it and burning out. So we're in this cycle, never quite having the goal arrive. There's also that classic one, waiting for certainty. Well, I'll move towards this when I know it's definitely right, and then never moving at all. So there's lots of different ways that these patterns can show up in this sort of broad term we're calling manifestation. But really, it might be helpful to think of this as how we live, think, and move and move through this world, how we live, think, and feel in relation to what it is we're trying to do and achieve in life. Manifestation is just an umbrella term for clear action and getting results.
Yeah, exactly. You can couch these things in terms of the language of manifestation, but in many ways, we are talking about the everyday human condition in which we want to be a particular version of ourselves that is the potential, the higher potential of ourselves, the striving, the desire, which is one of the most beautiful things about human beings is that we can envision that higher version of ourselves. We can move towards that higher version of ourselves. And that tends to be something that everybody at some level is interested in, whether they're active about it or, less so on their priority list. But it's something that we understand is an inherent potential. And it's a really beautiful thing. So manifestation is really, in a certain really broad sense, talking about what is it that gets in the way of us being the best version of ourselves. And we understand blockage is that thing. And then, of course, if there isn't that blockage, then there is more flow. There's more of an organic unfolding, we might say.
In many cases, some form of creation or some level of creation is happening, right? It's just fragmented. So one part of the system is saying yes, and then another part of the system is sort of quietly applying the brakes. And usually the braking part isn't aware that it's sort of sabotaging you. It's that sense that we spoke of earlier, often related to the nervous system. It's protecting something. There's some sense of safety or attachment or identity or belonging involved in that sense of something breaking. So if you're stuck, your system isn't broken. It's a case of understanding what's protecting, what's standing in the way, what's unconscious material might be suggesting that this is something that we can't have or shouldn't be moving towards. And I'm going to flip that on its head as well and just highlight how common it is as well that we're often trying to manifest things that we're not truly in alignment with. And that's a really key point. Getting in touch with really tuning into your goals and aspirations and intentions for yourself and saying, am I truly aligned? Am I aligned at the heart level? Is this something that's really relevant for me, that's going to bring me greater joy, that's going to bring greater harmony? Or is this something that I think somehow I should be bringing into being? And that's really often why forcing manifestation doesn't work, because we can't apply willpower against the grain of what's for our highest alignment.
That's a really good point to say that the things that we even consciously want to create are sometimes or even often out of alignment with what is actually true for us. And so that's because, of course, there's some kind of internal fragmentation, as you said, some kind of conditioning. And very often, this kind of conditioning will come from family pressure, social pressure, the expectations of others that we take on as a template for who it is that we think that we're supposed to be. I immediately think of my own journey. I think of so many of my friends and people I grew up with, and how many of us come into adulthood thinking we're going to be a particular thing, a certain career, a certain aspiration, and often life teaches us that, oh, in fact, that's not actually what we want. So there's some kind of, in that sense, a kind of a life or a career even drive, right, that is somehow misaligned immediately. And this happens at more and more micro levels as well. But the idea, of course, again, that very often we're driven to want or to create things that might not very well be coming from our more genuine, authentic places. And that can be a little surprising to get in touch with.
So, what changes might we see when the system opens, as it were, when we start working consciously with strengthening our energetic coherence and harmonizing this mind body field relationship and blueprint so that our intention is flowing smoothly into form?
We want to be able to basically have access to the flow state, as it's called, in with athletes now or in certain kinds of corporate settings, et cetera. Being present, being in the moment, and having things kind of move through us in an effortless way. And that's a really nice way to think about it is imagine this system of chakras, this filtering system of different dimensions and energies and frequencies, and things have to go from one level to another level to another level. Imagine it being like a pipe, and the pipe is usually clogged up, but if you clear that pipe, right, the energy just flows right through it. It just moves right through it. That's like the flow state. And so when that happens and we become more clear within ourselves, creation happens much more easily. Alignment happens effortlessly. And that's the directionality that we tend to want to move towards.
And this happens, of course, when people are doing healing and awakening work in general. They notice it as their system becomes into greater alignment and more what we might call subconscious or unconscious material is cleared away, right? That decisions get clearer. There's less internal negotiation. We're not arguing with ourselves sort of each and every step of the way. It might be that timing becomes cleaner as well, right? We intuitively know when it's time to act and we don't push when it's not, right? So we notice that the signal of the system is steadier, if you will. We're more aligned, more in tune. And we might say that when coherence returns, things don't need to be forced.
For example, like working with clients, a very common thing that is a piece of feedback with people is something like, oh, as a result of certain work that we've done, all of a sudden I just got a job the other day that I've been wanting for the last year, or that circumstance that has been a really big problem with me in a particular relationship, that has seemingly just resolved itself quite quickly, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm not saying this to make any kind of claims, so to speak, about what somebody gets as a result, but rather to say when your system, when your energy system clears up, when the chakras have more flow, things tend to be a lot more smooth. There's like this idea of the law of attraction, right? And this is like a big topic, big phrase, law of attraction. It's the idea that you attract to yourself what it is that you are magnetizing. And it means the conscious and the unconscious stuff. So very often when we're caught in these loops of that the blockage within us kind of keeps magnetizing certain kinds of energies, then we get stuck in these patterns. And when we release those blocks, when we clear them, those patterns kind of fall away somewhat effortlessly because they're not relevant. We're not manifesting them anymore unconsciously. Kind of spontaneous changes will take place. Another one that comes to mind is just, and I always love this, the experience of this in particular, because in real time, you can really experience this with energy work, is that at times something shifts energetically within your field and all of this creative input drops in, all these ideas, like epiphanies and creativity. And it's a beautiful thing. That's almost like download. Sometimes people use this kind of word. They'll say, oh, I got a download, and sometimes they're referring to this kind of energetic clarity that translates into a very deep and quick kind of epiphany moment.
We might even say that the manifestation really is becoming a response or a result rather than a pursuit, sort of active pursuit. So I think there's less desire, it's fair to say, to stop chasing outcomes and instead to start orientating your system and allowing things, as you said, to show up in very ordinary ways. It's quite an interesting way of discussing what other people might call synchronicity, right? Things showing up as a feedback to the internal state of the system, right? An alignment and natural coherence feedback.
I think when we consider what is it like as a kind of a result to have more energetic clarity in relation to this word manifestation, yes, there is always going to be room for targeting something, meaning you want something specific. And so you try and, like we were kind of saying, there's a cliche of like the mood board, the vision board, the visualization practice, right? All of those things to create a specific outcome. And that's okay. But really, manifestation also covers the other domains in which, as our system opens up, we also start to become more harmonious with our environments. And things start to kind of arise and interact with us in ways that seemingly might feel outside of ourselves. It's almost like we're having a conversation with the environment, with relational fields. Sometimes it can be rather grand and people will talk about kind of like the universe is, coming to meet me, so to speak, a much grander kind of language to describe. But synchronicity is a big word, as you mentioned. Synchronicity can be that kind of matching of something, a signaling of the external and the internal worlds kind of coming into a certain alignment.
If you're feeling the pull for more clarity, greater direction, or even a grounded sense of purpose as this new year starts to unfold, or if you've explored all the manifestation tools, right, mindset work, affirmations, vision boards, but something still feels misaligned or incomplete, maybe you're curious about the chakras as a map for transformation, or you wish to understand how they're influencing your creativity, your intuition, and your embodiment, then you're perhaps ready to align with your energy system and create from a deeper, truer place within. If you're feeling called by this work, then please do feel free to check out the upcoming experiential workshop next weekend. That is going to be held live with Keith and myself, live online on Zoom, Manifestation and the Chakras Creating from the Inside Out. We look forward to seeing you there if you'd like to join. If you're more broadly interested in this from the perspective of general healing and awakening work, you might wish to check out our longer form trainings. We have a fantastic EHT, energy healing training program, where we really dive deep into a lot of the material we've covered today from the angle of releasing held energies and distortions and moving towards a truer and more coherent place in life.
So thank you all so much for listening to this episode.
Looking forward to seeing how things unfold in the workshop. Many thanks. Thanks for being a part of the Future of Wellness. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It helps us reach more people and to make great episodes like this one. Learn more about field dynamics and why we think the future of wellness matters. Check us out at energyfielddynamics.com. See you next time.